We've got a very, very special episode. Actually, let me backtrack. We got a very special stream tonight. Very special. So I did this last year when I was doing my other podcast. So for those of you that follow me on YouTube or subscribe to me on YouTube or follow my Discord, you know that I started a new podcast this year in January called For the Love of Humankind. And so tonight is a special night because we are doing it live rather than recording. I mean, obviously, we're still going to be recording and, posting this on YouTube as well. But I wanted to do it live because this is the 10th episode of the podcast. And I just think it allows me to interact with you all in a live sense. So I'm able to really be able to talk about some of these things with you all and get some of your perspectives as we have our conversation. So when's the next episode of Leveling Up? That is a great question. Leveling Up, for those of you that do know, that was my first podcast. Leveling Up with JC with the Shot. And, there may be a new episode of Leveling Up coming soon. There's some potential as we are getting into a new cycle of gaming. So there's potential there. There's potential. My green screen is just all sorts of fucked up today, chat. I don't really know what's going on here. But this ring light is popping my eyes. I'm probably popping other things too, but let's see. To cooperate. No, we cannot. That is fine. It is fine. Everything's fine. It's fine. We're popping cherries. We're popping all sorts of stuff. So, chat and YouTube, because, this is going up on YouTube tomorrow. Welcome to a brand new episode of For the Love of Humankind. As always, I am your host, Jeff. If you're watching this on Twitch, you also know me as JC with the Shot. You can find me on Twitch. You can find me on Twitter, JC with the Shot, although I haven't been on Twitter in a month and a half now. If you watched my last podcast episode, you'll know that I have been taking a break from social media, at least on my phone. I haven't really been on it at all. It's all deleted. And this is Jay Cox on Instagram. You can find me there as well. And so I want to welcome you all to this week's episode. For those of you that tuned into the opening, we had some Miley Cyrus playing. We had The Climb playing, which is actually very, very fitting for our conversation for this week's episode of the podcast. I talk very, very quickly when I do my podcast most of the time. So this episode For the Love of Humankind is sponsored by Fiji Water. Natural artisan water from the islands of Fiji. We're actually not sponsored, but I got some good old Fiji to keep my lips nice and moist while we're in the process of this episode. And so I want to welcome you to this week's episode. As I've been rambling, The Climb is a great intro, I think, to this week's episode because we are really talking about the climb of failure and talking about what life is like with failure. It tastes like flowers. It doesn't, but it tastes great. And so talking about failures of life, talking about overcoming failure, talking about some of the things in my life, especially recently that I kind of consider to be failures and some of the ways that I'm kind of, working through those because at the end of the day, like we're all going to fail at shit. We're all going to fail at a variety of different things. And really it's the way that we combat that failure that defines us as a person. or if we, resonate and keep that idea of we're always going to consistently fail, that also is going to be a very big defining characteristic of you as a person. And so I really just kind of wanted to talk about this because this past week has been how do I put this, kind of a shit show for me. And it's been very hard to try and keep a positive attitude over the last week. And for those of you that are watching this live, you're probably like, for you having a shitty week, like your attitude's fairly upbeat. And that is true. I didn't stream yesterday because yesterday was kind of the icing on the cupcake of the week. And I'll kind of get into that a little bit and talk a little bit more about that. But cupcakes, yeah, cupcakes sound great right now. But yeah, because I think that failure is an important topic. And in the last episode, I don't want to say I got criticism for some of the things that I said, but it was more so like trying to explain, and maybe the way that I presented some of the topics didn't come out the best. And what I'm referring to is my comments about parenting and how handing your child like a smart device when they're young, just to kind of like shut them up, instead of like spending time with them or doing things with them, wasn't necessarily explained the best that I could. And that could be seen as a failure of parenting, right? But I also think that in that situation, and I'm gonna bring this back to what I'm gonna talk about this week, is that we aren't setting our future generations up for success by providing them an easy way, or for us trying to take the easy way out, because that's not going to help them, in a variety of different ways, because you're trying to take the easy way out for them. And I grew up, and I've talked about this before, I grew up in a super, super small town. I was adopted. I was an only child, and so I had a lot of attention for the most part from my parents. I was fairly spoiled. I still can be spoiled. My mom and I are like best friends. I've talked about that in past episodes. And so for me, I had a lot of high expectations as I grew up. I did my fair share of dumb shit. And while I didn't necessarily get grounded ever, although my mom liked to use that phrase, that I was grounded, or that she would take my cell phone away for things that she either found or an attitude that I brought forward to her. I was very lucky in my upbringing, in a sense that I grew up in a time where technology was still kind of on the rise. Like, I grew up with dial-up, grew up with AOL Messenger. If somebody called the house phone and you were on the computer, they either couldn't get through with the phone, or it just like completely cut your internet off, and you couldn't load anything. It was also the case when I finally started playing online video games, and we got a phone call. It would sign me out of playing Halo, which is what I first started playing when I was online gaming. And it's crazy, and Frank, I'm glad that you kind of brought this up, about taking cell phones away as a punishment, because yeah, that really does reinforce that electronics are something that you need. And that's even more of the case, I think, now than when I was growing up. I am very quickly approaching 30, and times have definitely changed from then. So it was crazy. I mean, I got a cell phone when I was in 7th grade, because I was going to high school. My high school was 7th through 12th, and that was one of the things that they talked about when we did like our high school orientation. They said, you know, if you want to get a hold of your kids, like, they can use their cell phone like at lunch, and if they need to get in contact with you. So that was a big reason why I had it to start off, and then very, very quickly, texting came out. I think right around, or became more popular right around like 8th grade for me. And I remember, I remember that I was on a 250 text message plan back then, and this is wild to think about, because now like texting is unlimited, but back then you like either used minutes or you had like a special amount of text that you could send and receive monthly. And I'm going on a tangent, but I promise I'm going to bring this back. But I remember that there was 1 month that I was texting so much, and I think I was supposed to have like 500 texts back and forth, and I hit 9,000 texts back and forth, which is 8,500 more than I was supposed to. And I remember my mom getting the phone bill from Verizon, and the phone bill was $900. So she was not happy with that. And once that happened, we very, very quickly switched to unlimited texting, which saved us about, $700 on that bill. Phone bills still aren't cheap. Like, you still get charged an arm and a leg for phone bills, but it is actually wild to think about how things have changed, and how even like the psychology and the cognition, cognition, is that the word I want to use? Cognitive psychology, that kids have these days, or generations that are younger than I am, have these days, because very quickly, and I know this isn't an all-encompassing comment, but I know that for those that grew up in older generations, either they learned the hard way about things. I have a lot of friends, unfortunately, whose parents belted them. I don't know if belting your kid is still a thing to this day, but I do know that I had friends who that happened to, like, their parents did that, and that was their form of like punishment, but also like teaching them a lesson. Because if like the story of like Pavlov's dogs, right? And not the story, I guess, the experiment and research that is Pavlov's dogs, of continuing to do something and then being rewarded, that you would continue to do that, and then once the reward was taken away, you would still continue to do that, because you have been trained that whatever you do is a positive outcome, or provides a positive outcome, and that is a good thing that you're supposed to be doing. So on the reverse side of that, right, like, you see or you do something wrong, and your parents would punish you with physical harm. I mean, you see that too, like back in education, right? Like, teachers would be able to hit kids with rulers. Teachers would also be able to put dunce caps on kids if they were doing something stupid. And so that form of like public humiliation very quickly trains the mind of impressionable kids to not do things, you know, that are inappropriate. And Franklin, I deserve a dunce cap. I've probably deserved a dunce cap once or twice in my life, maybe more than that. But the whole idea of that sort of punishment slash psychological method that you see not only in Pavlov and supporting rewards for behavior, but in also when something is done wrong, punishing that, right? And so subconsciously our mind begins to create these scenarios that really drives how we respond to a lot of different things. And failure does the exact same thing. And everybody internalizes failure very, very differently. And as I kind of said, like the comments with failure that I'm going to kind of talk through tonight aren't necessarily one size fits all, because everybody manages failure differently. Everybody has experienced failure differently. And when I first started, experiencing and researching and doing presentations on failure during my lifetime, I was doing this when I was in grad school, and this is a time where I really started to focus on what failure actually looks like, and how to really combat that and work through that. And it's crazy because, as I said, I grew up spoiled. I grew up as an only child. Like, my parents never really punished me to a huge extent. But obviously I did my dumb shit, and I learned one way or another from those things and didn't do them again. And so as I kind of talk about, some of the things tonight, and focusing on what failure looks like and what I've seen it look like in a lot of students that I work with and individuals, even myself, there's a huge trend in failure and the way that we approach it, because I think that typically we see failure as a negative thing. I think society reinforces that. I think that capitalism reinforces that, as we talked about capitalism a few weeks ago in the podcast. But failure for most people kind of resembles like an end of the line. And I think that there is a problem with that. I think that seeing failure as kind of the end all be all for something, really, one, is not productive. But two, it focuses our brain to be negative against ourselves, and increases lower self-esteem, motivation, dedication, all of those Asians, I'm gonna say it like that, all of those Asian words, because we don't like to fail. Like there have been times where in my life, I have tried out for specific sports teams and haven't made them because I was a little chubby boy and wasn't very good, especially playing baseball. Was not very good at baseball. Like I would have my few lucky plays, but I remember when I finally moved to playing third base in high school, I always overthought throwing the ball from third to first. And most of the time when I would let go of the ball, throwing it to first, it would probably hit the dirt or hit the ground before it even got to first base. Because I would hold it too long. I would let it go because like at a weird angle, because I was thinking too much, because I was like, shit, I don't want to fail. I don't want want to make myself look like a fool. And that didn't help. Like, I think that mental block affected the way that I played and showed up in those times. And Franklin, you were put in right field because that's where they put all the trash players. Yeah, that's usually where they put the slow kids. Not like slow as in speed. And that was usually where the kids sat and picked dandelions or played with the grass. And I was definitely one of those kids growing up. But I did that in left field too. So but that's just one example of failure. And I think that growing up, not only are we feeling pressure from parents, family members, guardians, teachers, society, all of these coaches, all of these things are putting this pressure on us to succeed, and to do so without making mistakes, and to do so without failing. And I think that truly sets up generations not to be successful. And the reason that I think that is because we learn a lot from our failures. We learn a lot from the things that we do wrong. And we learn a lot from the ways that we approach things that may not necessarily work. And we'll talk about resiliency through this episode too, because I think resiliency is a huge part of failure and learning how to rebound or bounce back from that failure. But resiliency isn't something that you can necessarily learn, in my opinion. It's something that you are able to work through as you go through different situations in your life, right? And I wasn't great at baseball, and so I quit playing baseball, and focused my attention on soccer and Jesus Christ. That's what I focused my energy on when I was in high school. So only one of those actually helped me to be where I'm at today. And I'm gonna let you all guess which one that is. And it's not somebody that I share the same initials with. But overall, sorry, I'm getting a phone call from Grand Bay, Alabama. I don't know why. I didn't even know there was a Grand Bay in Alabama. But yeah, I think that, not me. I think that as children and as we, grow up, with all of those pressures on us, we don't want to fail. We don't want to be embarrassed because we made a mistake. I know there would be times when I was in class and I would, I'm not even gonna say in class because I still say stupid shit, and people laugh at the things that I would say that were wrong. Even today, people laugh at things that I say that are wrong, which doesn't make me feel great, and it didn't make me feel great. And so it's really how you come out of that, right? Okay, why are they, you think about it. Okay, why are they laughing at me? What is it that I said that was wrong? What is the right thing? And how do I make sure I don't make a mistake like that again to avoid from being embarrassed? Because I embarrass actually very, very quickly. I like to pretend like I have this whole wall up in front of me, but I actually get embarrassed very easily. And take it very, very personally, and that's not a great form of resiliency that I show, even after all of the research and all the stuff that I talk about being resilient in life. And so I know that I'm running in a tangent, and I know that I'm moving from example to example, but I promise there is a method to my madness. As I kind of work through some of these things. And so community factors parents, teachers, other kids, capitalism, society, all teaches us that we need to do specific things in life to be successful, right? I grew up, did very, very well in math and science throughout all of K through 12. That was kind of my shining subjects. And so as I was exploring colleges and as I was exploring what I wanted to do with my life, my family was very persistent on me being a doctor because, I went to a high school that had 352 total students, or 365, and I had 52 in my graduating class. And that was a great reason for me to, be great in college, because I did super, super well at math and science in a school in a farm town. Made lots of sense. And so I go to college, right? And I have this almost like pressure or like weight on my shoulders that of my family that it made me really feel that, being a doctor was the only option for me to be successful in my life. And before, deciding to be a doctor, I'm going to take a little backtrack here. I originally was going to go to a religious institution to study to become a pastor. And so, yeah, that didn't happen. And so I went into college and into pre-med and wanted to be an anesthesiologist because they make like, 6 figures every year, but they also have like a lot of liability in their position. And that was a big reason for me going into college, is because I was like, okay, in order to be successful and do the things in life that I want to do, because of our capitalistic society, I need to do a job that is going to pay me a lot of money, and I need to do a job that my family expects me to have to do. And that was a big learning point in my life, because after my freshman year of college, I not only failed chemistry 2, I got a 2.0 in chemistry 1, and I got a 1.1 GPA in calculus. And so these classes that I did very, very well in high school, I did not do well in college. Granted, in high school, I felt like I never really had to study. I felt like things came very, very easy to me, thankfully. And honestly, the education level for my high school was not super high. And I say that and know that there are students that I went to school with that struggled in that education. But like, it was easy. I don't know. That's what I'm gonna say. And that's fine, right? Again, that there's a lot of stuff with that, and that's a whole another conversation for a different time about how K-12 does not prepare you for college. But I think it's interesting to see my transition of coming from high school where I felt like I barely needed to study, graduating 8th in my class with a 3.8 GPA, and then going to college and finishing my first year with a 2.2 GPA, after pretty much all I knew growing up was getting A's and B's. And so that was very, very hard on me. And my feeling of being worthy of going to college, or being worthy of all the praise that my family gave me. I remember trying to have a conversation and talk about my first year of college with family members, and I refused to talk about it with family members when they asked, I'd say, oh yeah, like I've met a lot of friends, like I did this and I did this. Never really talked about my GPA as much because I felt ashamed. And I think that's a bigger issue in our society that I could talk about in a whole nother episode. But I remember after my first year, I was like, oh my God, like I'm going to get kicked out of college. Like, what am I going to do? Like, this is everything that has been expected for me to do. Like, I don't want my family to look down upon me, especially as I'm the first one to go away to college. In my family, and they look and hold me very high in this light because of how well I did in high school, and all of the things that I did, from like quiz bowl to, you know, being on the honor roll, all of these things, dual enrolling in high school, like all of these things that I did, and here I am after my first year of college with a 2.2 GPA. Lost all of my scholarships because of that, and I really just did not feel great. That year I had also received an offer to work for orientation, which is where I met one of my best friends, Franklin, and where everything just kind of started for me to get to actually where I'm at now. And so I remember after the spring semester, before we were supposed to start orientation work, I was called into the office, and I was called in there by my supervisor, and then the director, who was transitioning out of that role into a different role. And they sat me down and they said, you know, after this semester, you don't meet the GPA requirement for this position. I think the requirement was like a 2.75. And as I said, I was at a 2.2. And I remember sitting in that office and really just thinking like, shit, this is where it all ends. Like, this is where my journey ends. Like, I don't know what to do. And I remember sitting there crying, as I feel like they're going to tell me that I'm losing my job that I really didn't even start. And the conversation that they had with me was, you know, we all, you know, struggle at some points, but we want to be able to keep you on staff. But we are going to ask that you go, you know, talk to an advisor, change your major, things like that. And then once that takes place, we can revisit this conversation. And I'm very, very thankful for that. Because in that moment, I was at the lowest possible point, and felt like I had no direction in my life, and everything that I had worked up to was being stripped away from me, right then and there. And that failure, just I still to this day think about that as a turning point in my life. And now I sit here having those same conversations with students in my career, about the tough semesters that they had, a mistake they made, you know, in their life. And I'm able to talk about that moment and think about, okay, like, how did I come out of that moment stronger than when I went in? And that's hard to do in a lot of situations, right? Like, I have talked with students who have gotten DUIs. I have talked with students who have gotten MIPs. For those of you that don't live in Michigan, you may not necessarily know some of these, but MIPs are minors in possession, so those that are drinking under the age of 21. DUIs, obviously driving under the influence, usually alcohol, but now it's including, you know, drugs. And talking with students who failed a course, in their major, right? And a lot of times we see these as end all be alls of time. I know that whenever I got a D on a test, I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the end of my world. And I would put that pressure on myself because I am receiving that pressure from everywhere else in my life. And I think that we see that in society, right? Like you look at, this is a terrible example, but I'm going to use it. But you look at like TMZ, right? Who reports on things celebrities did wrong, celebrity drama, all of these things, right? Like we treat them as though these individuals need to be perfect in everything that they do, because they have so many eyes on them, and because so many people can visibly see the things that they're doing in life, so they need to be absolutely perfect, which isn't the case, because literally we're all going to fail at something, and that's part of being a person. Like, it's crazy to see all of the pressure that gets put on somebody because of the status that they hold. Now, granted, there can be exceptions. Not saying that it should be an exception, because our government is you can listen to other episodes to listen to how I feel and how my friends feel about the current government. But there are also things, in government that fail, right? And there are things that shouldn't fail because of morality and humanity and caring for the general senses of a person. But you look at the pandemic, we failed hard as shit in the pandemic. We're still in it, but like, we failed so bad at our response. And I'm not going to give excuses to the person who wrote it off as a hoax. But at the same time, none of us in our lifetime have ever managed or worked through a pandemic at this scale. There have been epidemics, sure. But how are we supposed to know how to work through a pandemic if we've never experienced it, right? Like, how am I supposed to know how to play? And again, this is a terrible metaphor. How am I supposed to know how to play piano if I've never played piano, right? And I think that because there is, in celebrity, in government, in professional sports, we expect these individuals to master their craft. We expect them to be perfect, right? Look at LeBron James. Like, when he left Cleveland for the first time, people were burning his jersey because he decided, okay, I'm going to go play with one of my best friends down in Miami. Was that a mistake? Did he fail the city of Cleveland? Absolutely, he failed the city of Cleveland the first time. But when he came back, he gave them that championship that they've been waiting for and they expected from the start with him. And so we don't know how to combat things, and we don't know how to approach scenarios if we've never been through them. Right? I can think of plenty of things in my life that if you threw me into it, I would have no clue what to do unless like somebody told me or I watched a video prior to doing it. Right? Like if somebody told me, hey, why am I using these metaphors? But if somebody told me, hey, go skin this animal, I would have no fucking clue how to skin an animal. Like I would fail miserably at that. But doing it once and learning from that mistake or that failure is going to help me be successful in the future. And that's the definition of resiliency, right? Like, how do we take failure? How do we look at that and the mistakes that we made, avoid making those again, and getting the outcome we got the first time, and moving forward, becoming more successful in that piece, and being where we want to be, right? Like, the light bulb wasn't created off the bat. Like, all of these things in our life have not been created like immediately right off the bat, working perfectly the first time. So why do we expect anything different from the kids that are growing up, from celebrities, from athletes? Is it because we expect them to be masters of their craft? I mean, yeah, I think that's a piece of it, and you know, they get paid millions for doing what they do and being good at it, mostly unnecessarily. But why are we putting the same pressure on kids, right? Because I think that pressure not only affects their mental health and their cognitive psychology and their growth as a person, but as I already stated, they're super impressionable. And so the things that we put on kids growing up is going to stick with them, whether we know it or not. And that's really hard. You know, there are a lot of great quotes when it comes to failing. One of the quotes that I love to use the most, and for those of you that you know, maybe DC comic fans or have seen the Batman movies, you probably will recognize this quote, because it still is one of my favorite quotes of all times, because it really focuses on failure and resiliency. And so in The Dark Knight, there is a scene where Alfred is talking to Bruce Wayne as a child, and you know, Bruce fell into this well. The bats came out of nowhere, and hence his story of becoming Batman. And Alfred says to Bruce Wayne, he says, "Why is it that we fall?" Right? So why is it that we fail? Why is it that we fall at what we're doing? And then he says, so that we can learn to pick ourselves back up. And I think that is a perfect quote to encompass resiliency. How do we take the failures in our lives that, you know, we have had, get up and keep moving, right? You fall down 7 times, you get up 8, and you've learned from those 7 times before, so that it doesn't happen on that 8th time. And I think that is something that we don't utilize in society very successfully. I don't think that we, especially in school, you know, I've been out of elementary and high school a long time, so I can't speak to what that looks like today in conversation with kids, but I know that when I was in school, I didn't have teachers that were like, okay, so let's talk about this, and how do we get to a point that you are being more successful, or that you're understanding these topics or these concepts. And that's not something that I knew until I was in my 20s. That is not a concept that I really thought about, or practiced or preached. And that is something that I consistently do with my students now, because I think that that's not something that is taught or talked about. Like, you know, and when again, going back to Pavlov, or going back to being belted as a child, these are physical acts that are done or shown to help somebody understand what they did was good or bad, right? And yeah, like I think that is a part of a learning process, but again, we're not having the conversation of, you know, you did this, you know, how do you think that was wrong, or how do you think that you could approach that differently, so that we don't do that again, right? And I think that's easier said than done. And there is this concept in one of the books that Robbie and I used to present on, called The Happiness Advantage by Sean Aker. And in this book, there are essentially seven principles that will allow you to be happier in your life, and in turn be more successful, because you're happier. And one of the principles is called falling up. And it's the idea that, you know, when you fail, you use those failures as a stepping stone to get to that next point in your life to avoid that failure again. And it's a concept that is so easily like envisioned. And I think something that is so easy to just like conceptualize and think about, that I sometimes wonder why it is that we don't share that more often. And it's interesting because, again, as I said, like resiliency isn't something that I learned about until I was like 20, right? And resiliency in that sense probably has a lot to do with the identities that I hold, and the privilege that I held, especially, I mean, now and growing up. Because there are people that had to learn resiliency very, very early on because of their identities, especially, you know, in gentrified areas, especially in areas where police presence was very, very high. Resiliency in the form of being alive and surviving exists for a lot of people very, very early on. And again, like that's not something that I experienced, and I recognize that, but resiliency shows up in a lot of different ways, right? It's not just necessarily in school. It's not necessarily you know, in the goals in our lives, but really in society as a whole, because society as a whole, I'm gonna say it, does not know how to be resilient. They don't. Like, especially if you look at and I hate to keep bringing up politics. I told myself I was going to take a break from politics this week in the podcast, but especially if you look at people in the government sector and you look at things that they propose and very quickly get shut down or torn apart, and they get defensive instead of taking that feedback and addressing it and improving on what other people have said, right? Because at the end of the day, this is going to be a very bleak point, but at the end of the day, we are all alone in this life. We typically come into life alone and we leave life alone. But as we live life in this world with many other people who technically are alone, there is a way to build each other up and provide feedback, and all of us becoming more successful and being larger parts and better parts of society. And in order to, you know, make this life something that is, you know, worth living, something that is going to sustain people, you know, for millennium to come. And as of right now, like that's not looking like that's going to be the case. Who knows? That could change. But if individuals are not able to accept that they are going to fail, accept that they need to receive feedback in order to be the best that they can be, things aren't going to change. And we're going to stay in the same spot that we've always stayed in. And that is a sad fact about not accepting failure. That is a sad fact about closing yourself off when you fail. Like, I honestly don't know where I would be if I let essentially failing my freshman year of college deter me from staying in college. Like, I don't know where I would be. Like, I have had failed friendships, I have had failed relationships, but nothing in my life has impacted me more than that freshman year of college, and that chance that somebody took on me to learn from that failure, which I did. I ended up graduating with a 3.3. Changed my major to communication and graphic design. Went to grad school, got a master's degree, 4.0'd my master's degree. Went into a salaried position on my second salaried position. And none of that would have happened if I would have dwelled on that failure. Nothing would have happened if I didn't do anything about it. Or if somebody didn't say, hey, this happened. How do we move forward from this? And my challenge for those that are watching or those that are listening is that challenge the people around you. Like, if they make a mistake, if they fail at something, if you fail at something, thinking about how it is you got to that point. What is it that made you fail? Was there a specific decision that you made that made you fail? Was there something that took place while you were doing something that made you fail? Like, what was it? And thinking about that and saying, okay, like, I'm going to try this again. How do I approach this differently? Now, there are going to be scenarios in which you probably aren't going to be able to succeed. And that's a fact. Like, there's no way that I am going to make it into the NBA. That's just not going to happen, no matter how much I try. But that doesn't mean that I can't try to work on different things to get me to be a part of that organization, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that, like, I have to play, but if I wanted to be a part of the NBA, okay, like, how do I do what I'm doing now? How do I transition what I'm doing into getting me into a place to be a part of that organization? Not saying that that's something I want to do. Just an example, but I think that we put expectations on ourselves sometimes that are too high to be able to achieve. And that seems dark, and I know that seems kind of that's probably a controversial statement, but you need to be able to set goals within your reality. And that's another big part of understanding your success and where you'll be in life, is setting realistic goals for yourself. Another thing that Shawn Achor talks about in the Happiness Advantage. And if on the way to that goal, you fail over and over, change what you're doing, right? Like, change the way that you are approaching different things. And so what are some of my realistic goals? Franklin asked. So, some of my realistic goals, and these are pretty short-term goals that I've kind of talked about and that I put on Twitter and put out there. Nothing that's necessarily career related at the time. But two of my big goals that I can really work towards is losing 50 pounds by the time I turn 30, and getting 30 and having 30 tattoos by the time I turn 30. And for some, like, oh, those are stupid goals. But for me, like, these are things that I want to do for myself, right? Like, tattoos seems like a weird goal to have, but it's also an expression of who I am. And then obviously the weight, like, I just want to get back to a healthier place. And so whatever those goals are for you, the big part is setting up short-term goals within those long-term goals so that you are able to see for yourself if you're hitting those marks. And if you're not, okay, how do I address that and change that and get to the marks that I want to hit, right? And as I kind of look to close out this week's episode here in the next few minutes or so, I kind of want to talk about the 6 domains of resilience, as we're on the topic of failure and rebounding from failure and learning from that piece, because I think this is super interesting and something that I've learned along the way. And so the 6, and I'm going to kind of talk about these things and how to make yourself more resilient at the end. So we kind of talked about goals already, but vision is the first domain. So what is the purpose? What are your goals? What is the congruence, right? So how do you move forward from that failure, and how do you place those goals? What do you envision seeing as the end goals, and what do you see as the purpose of moving forward from succeeding from that recent failure? The next domain is composure, right? So how are you responding to that failure? How are you regulating your emotions? How are you interpreting your bias in the situation? And are you calm, and are you in control of how you react to what took place? If you failed and you're super, super pissed off and you're like, okay, I'm never going to try that again, obviously you're not going to be resilient in that regard, and you're not going to ever succeed at doing that if you quit, right? Failure is not your end line, and failure is not your end goal. If you want to be successful, you have to expect that you're going to fail and make mistakes along the way. And that's a part of life. Like, we're not perfect. We truly aren't. And I fail every single day. Like, I fail my friends maybe not every single day, but there are things that I still do that don't meet the expectations of myself or of my friends or of my family. And that's okay, because I know that I can actively work to address those things. The third domain is reasoning. So your problem solving, your resourcefulness, anticipating and planning, right? So how do you take that failure, again, problem solve what took place, and how do you use what you have in your life, or how do you look out to other people as resources to be able to assist in being successful and getting to a point of learning from that. The fourth domain is health. So your nutrition, sleep, exercise, these are all going to help lead to getting to a better place, because it's going to help you think more critically. It's going to allow you to just feel overall better about yourself, and really just be able to think more clearly, especially if you're used to, putting substances in your body that are harming your body more than they're being helpful. The fifth domain is tenacity. So your persistence at trying to be better or learning from your mistake. Again, coming back to that realistic optimism, your realistic goals, right? Like, how do you, in your mind, realistically place yourself at your kind of end goal? And then how do you bounce back? Again, resiliency as a whole is that notion of bouncing back and learning from what took place. And then the sixth domain is collaboration. So how are you using your support networks, your social contexts, managing perceptions, right? We talked about the embarrassment that sometimes comes with failure, or the fear of failure, or the fear of being hurt by your failure or hurting others, right? Like, how do you successfully manage those perceptions of your impact, but also the impact other people have on yourself? And I think that's a big part of thinking about coming back and bouncing back from a failure, or something that's holding you from getting to that next step, right? And I talked about at the beginning of this episode that this week has been kind of shitty, right? And there's been a lot of things I think this week that I've realized, maybe not necessarily my own doing, but understanding that I could have always done something better. Like, every day there is something that I could always do better with, or do something differently to change. And you'll never know if what you did or what you didn't do would have changed the outcome of it. But you can always find a way to do better than what you did before, right? So one of the things that got me down this week, and this is something that I don't talk about a lot because it's a weird topic to talk about, is job searching. A job that I thought I had the best interview that I ever had in my life, and people absolutely loved me, and I got really good praise. After having the interviews, I didn't end up getting that job, and that's something that I found out yesterday, which was really, really difficult for me to be able to process, because I put everything that I had into it, and it's still something that's what did I do? I'm still thinking about what I could have done differently. But at the end of the day, if you are true to yourself and that you put your best foot forward, but other people aren't willing to accept that, maybe that's on them. Maybe that's their failure and they need to learn from that mistake, right? And so everything in life is always going to be a twofold story. There's always going to be two stories to everything that takes place. If you truly are putting your best foot forward, and what you're doing is to the best of your ability, it's not harming other individuals. I'm going to put that out there. It's not impeding on the success of other people. Then there's nothing to be down on yourself about. Because if at the end of the day, you're like, okay, I gave it my all. I know that everything that I put forward is the best that I can do. And if other people aren't willing to accept that, one, maybe that's not the thing for you, or two, maybe that's an oversight or failure on their part, and that's something that they're going to learn from. And so you never truly know, at the end of the day, again, what your impact is going to be on those around you. You're never going to know the impact that your failure has on other people, or the failure that other people's or the impact other people's failures has on you, right? And it's going to be that cycle, and it comes down to the end with wow, I'm stumbling over my words now. it comes down to how we can be resilient, how we can bounce back from that, how we can learn from that experience or that take or that whatever and move forward. And at the end of the day, like if I'm laying on my deathbed, I can come back and I can say I put my all into everything that I've done. Even the times that I made mistakes or the times that I failed, like I learned from those and I became a better person because of that. Now, there are going to be a lot of people that won't be able to say that. Trump is one of those people. Again, sometimes I just like to throw shade at people or individuals that have made the lives of so many people miserable. But, you know, some people just suck. And some people just can't accept the fact that they failed. And there's a lot to that, right? I'm not a psychologist. I don't know why people can't accept failure for what it is at times. Again, society norms, embarrassment, fear, all of those things plays a huge part in that. It would probably take me years of research to collect data on that. But if you're listening to this and you know, if you take something away, know that if you make a mistake or you fail, if you don't graduate, if you know, make a mistake in a relationship, lose a friendship, all of those things are things that we can learn from and things that we can take back to however we process and move forward. This last year has been hard on a lot of people. I've lost friends for things. I have probably lost the respect of quite a few people because of the way that I identify in a multitude of ways. And that's okay, because at the end of the day, and I've said this, I've said at the end of the day multiple times, I'm being true to myself. And I'm doing the best that I can with what I'm given or what I have. And sometimes we need to understand that. That idea of realism, realistic optimism, realistic goals, all of those things come down to what we do for ourselves and how we set ourselves up for that point. You know, I am a very hopeful person. I have friends in my group that are not very hopeful people, and that's not a slander at them or me flaming them, but you know, their experiences are different than mine, and they experience things in life differently than I do. But I know at the end of the day, like we're going to support each other, and we're going to challenge each other. We're going to talk about each other's failures and mistakes and how do we move past them, because we want to be the best that we can be for each other and for those around and for people around us. And so as I close this week, please don't be afraid to fail. It's going to happen. If you fail, take that as an opportunity to move forward. You know, I know that there are specific people that are going to watch this episode and know that there are things that I brought up that are focal points to them. And I hope that you hear these things and use this as a challenge to see the adversity in your life at the moment to move forward. But if you're listening for the first time and you have adversity in your life, at the end of the day, fuck, why do I keep saying that? you know, that adversity is going to help you grow. It's going to help you grow. It's going to help you succeed. I am laughing. I am losing my mind as I continue to talk about this. I'm failing at avoiding the phrase at the end of the day. As my chat is pointing out, I'm at probably a 7 times. I've said that already. But I do want to thank you, and I again encourage you to explore the mistakes that you are making, explore the failures that you've had, and process. Sit down, write, you know, what you felt like went wrong and how you can avoid that from happening again. Because, you know, at the end of this lifetime, we want to be able to be there and say, okay, I did everything that I could to support myself, support those around me, and be the best that I can be. And so, YouTube, thanks for listening. If you made it this far through the video, please like, comment, share, subscribe. Maybe comment down below, you know, what are some of the failures that have been the hardest in your life? And what did you take away from those? For those of you that have been watching on Twitch over this last hour or so, thank you for being active, you know, in chat and you know, talking about some of the things as we go. I truly appreciate it. I do like doing these live because I think it brings a whole nother aspect to it. And so once again, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great weekend. Twitch, I am gonna keep streaming. I'm gonna switch over and play some Fortnite, and then I'll probably play some League a little bit later tonight. But YouTube, thank you so much for watching the video, and we will see you on the next episode of For the Love of Humankind. Thank you all, and have a great weekend.